All right, guys, we're back for part 3. Let's pick up where we left off. We're going to listen to another example of mixed meter. In this case, we're building a longer ostinato, a longer musical repeating figure with 3 repeating instances of compound time followed by an instance of simple time. So our ostinato is in 4 measures, 3 measures of compound followed by a measure of simple. So it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that pattern repeats over and over again. When the singer comes in, we end up fixing our metric feeling to just compound time. So by and large, we're listening to compound time more than any other time signature, but we do have a presence of mixed meter because there is an occasional occurrence of simple time. So let's go ahead and listen to Golden Brown by the Stranglers from the 1980s, a very interesting piece that uses mixed meter. Remember that we are also trying to investigate what's happening texturally in this piece. Knowing that we have something complicated rhythmically, we're probably going to be listening for homophonic texture. The whole song goes along like that, changing between the ostinato, that's 3 instances of compound time, followed by an instance of simple time, and then the singer singing in compound time. Let's go ahead and go over to my whiteboard and we can look at what it looks like on a piece of sheet music. Okay, here we go. So that was the Stranglers. Golden Brown. I hope you noticed that we were listening to mostly the lead singer and everyone supporting. So it was indeed homophonic texture. And the ostinato, the one that is in mixed meter, looks a little something like this. We have 3/4. We have 3 instances of it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, followed by an instance of 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this whole thing repeats for the first section. When we're just encountering the singer singing, it is just in 3/4. So whole sections in mixed meter where we're making strong use of a 4 measure ostinato and repeating it. Awesome. Great, great, great. So let's listen to some more music that does some metrically interesting things. We're going to listen to Outcast's Hey Ya. And what's fun about this is that there's a macro rhythm that's happening that it is sort of meant to emulate 11 big beats. We mostly hear it as like a back, forth, back, forth, back, forth feeling. However, there's like a larger structure that's happening that is in a grouping of 11. So, is it super noticeable? Only when it perhaps I pointed out. I think we're more engaged on a smaller level than 11 beats, and you might notice that like 11 is a really large number to hold on to. We've tended to like gravitate towards maybe 6 being our like top limit of a number so far, or even 7. But 11 beats is a little bit harder to sort of keep track of. So again, you're going to hear a lot of simple time, but I'll show you the overarching like macro level of 11 that happens in Outcast's Hey Ya. Wonderful. The whole video is great. Makes great use of an ostinato within that larger structure of 11. I love trying to count to 22 initially because it kind of illustrates exactly why we don't necessarily hear that macro beat structure. It's because it's really not 11, it's already 11 big beats, which are further divided out into groupings of 2. So Outcast Hea, we're hearing sort of a macro grouping of 11 in an ostinato, which has that like those 3 clicks right at the end to make it a really like strong identifier. We're not going to like draw that out in terms of music notation, but I'm going to go ahead and go over to my whiteboard anyway. Hopefully you notice that we have lots of homophonic and heterophonic texture that's happening here. For the most part, we're dealing with simple time, though. That's a division of 2, but we have a larger kind of structure that is, in a way, asymmetrical. Okay, here we go. So this is Outcast. Okay, yeah, with an exclamation point. So we have like a larger grouping of 11 for a macro meter, but we're really feeling like, for the most part, simple meter happening here. We also, in terms of texture and keeping it in green, we've got homophonic to heterophonic texture. I think a little bit bigger deal is made out of heterophonic, for whatever it's worth. And it looks like I am out of whiteboard space, so the next example will be on a fresh page. Speaking of our next example, we are going to take a listen to another example of asymmetrical time. So we're going to listen to Radiohead, a group that is well known for doing, or for creating pieces that do have like an interesting rhythmic layer to them, or at least some amount of asymmetry or experimental attitudes when it comes to rhythm. But Morning Bell uses 5 as our top number. So we're going to be trying to figure out 5 major pulses that are happening. So we're either going to have a grouping of 3 plus 2 or 2 plus 3. Let's go ahead and listen and see if we can't figure out what our grouping of asymmetrical meter is like in this piece. Okay. Morning Bell. Again, the method is always going to be the same. We're trying to find the pulse first and then figure out where the accented events are occurring. The ostinato that's happening here is always starting on 1. 1. 1. 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Asymmetrical meter, in which we're dealing with a grouping of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me go ahead and pull up my whiteboard with a fresh piece of canvas, and we will draw out what this looks like on a piece of sheet music. Okay, here we go. So we were listening to Radiohead. Morning Bell, which was indeed in an asymmetrical meter, where we were dealing with 5 as our top number. I don't know whether it was 8 or 16 or 4 or 2, but usually you pick a number that is most suitable for the piece of music to give you mobility upwards and downwards on the rhythm tree. Talked a little bit about that during our last lecture, but in order to show you how these are grouped together, I've picked 8th notes. So we were generally dealing with an ostinato, a repeating musical idea. These, by the way, these are bar lines that mean to repeat. Here's our ostinato. That's dealing with a stress on a group of 3 followed by a group of 2. So 3 plus 2 is how we arrive at the idea of asymmetrical meter. And of course, because we were listening to something a little bit more complicated texturally, or sorry, complicated rhythmically, we sort of get a little bit of a break texturally. So we're really just asked to listen to homophonic texture here. Tom York and everyone else supporting him. Wonderful. Okay. We have one more example that we are going to go through. This is an example, a pretty tricky one, but one that I really enjoy. And it's by the National. It's called Fake Empire. And what's interesting is we have a presence of what we call polymeter. So polymeter is the presence of more than one metric feel at a time, just like it relates to polyphony when we're talking about texture. Polyphony, many voices. In this case, polymeter, many meters. We feel 2 different metric feels at a time. And the division that we hear is a grouping of 4 and against a grouping of 3. The whole piece, what happens is that our grouping of one of our groupings is put to the forefront first, and the other one is put to the background, and then that relationship switches. Both feelings are there the entire time, but our ear preferences one versus the other at a given moment. At this point, it would be so much fun if we were in lecture, because I would show you, and I'll toggle over to a browser and show it to you anyway, but an optical illusion that you might have seen at some point. This optical illusion, it was one of my favorites. It is, you know what, I'm not gonna explain it. I'm gonna just show it to you first and let you look at it. Here we go. Okay, I hope some of you have seen this at some point. Just look at it. There are 2 images here. There is a young woman and an old woman. So the young woman, she's facing away. This is her jawline. This is her nose, eyelashes, a plume in her hair. All right. The old woman, big wrinkly nose here, nostril here, mouth, chin, white hair. This is her eye. So polymeter, how this relates to polymeter. The old woman is one time signature, the young woman is another time signature. Your ear or your eye can really only think about one of them at a time. The composite is absolutely there, but you preference one to another. So this is the same thing that's happening in the National's Fake Empire. I love that optical illusion. Okay, let me go ahead and play it for you. I'll show you what is happening there. Okay, here we go. For ostinato has very cool song. Very, very cool song. Let me go over to my whiteboard and show you what's happening in terms of the notation. So again, what this is called is polymeter, the presence of more than one meter simultaneously. Here we go. Okay, so this is again the National Fake Empire, where we're dealing with honestly, a melody and everyone being the accompaniment, there's otherwise so much other difficulty to listen to rhythmically. But if we're thinking about the notation, what's happening is that we're hearing 1, 2, 3, 4 against 1, 2, 3 simultaneously. That's not a time signature, that's just to notate that we're dealing with an example of what we call polymeter. More than 1 meter at a time. Great. So that's probably the most complicated one that we will encounter for a while. Polymeter is very complicated to listen to, but kind of like the old woman, young woman trick, what's happening is our ear is preferencing one to another at a given moment. Very, very cool technique to do compositionally. So in our last part, which will be significantly shorter, we're just going to listen to 3 pieces that mostly work with moving between simple meter and compound meter, which is one of the most common sort of rhythmic influences or sort of more like intermediate things that we listen to in popular music, often like going from a delivery of simple time and moving it to compound time. So we'll talk about simple compound meter in one example, and then the idea of sort of metric modulation, using 2 different feelings and pivoting between simple and compound time. All right, I'll see you for our last section soon.